Glide and Softr are two of our favorite applications for building internal tools for your organization. Hi, I'm Dan Lehman from AutomationHelpers.com, and we automate businesses through portals, apps, and integrations. Despite these tools going after the same set of users, there's quite a few differences between these applications, and that's what we're going to cover in this video. These kind of videos can tend to be a little bit on the longer side, so we've included timestamps down below so you can click on the section that's most relevant to you. We do have affiliate links for both of these applications in the description below, but we're not being compensated by either of these tools because ultimately we want to help you find the right fit for your organization. So first, let's talk about pricing. And this is a pretty big topic because the plans are priced pretty differently. Inside of Glide, if we scroll down, you can see that there's this calculator here where we're going off of two primary criteria: the number of users that are interacting with your application, as well as the number of updates. Now, what makes this difficult is if you are a new Glide user, you don't really have a way of understanding how many updates are you going to consume for your application. Yes, there's a calculator to say, okay, based on this number of updates, here's how expensive my plan is. But it's not saying, hey, I want to build a CRM. Tell me on average, what does a CRM look like for 50 users and how much is that going to cost me? So you're a little bit in the dark when it comes to determining those updates. Now, there are ways of mitigating the number of updates that you're going to consume, including using Glide's tables, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. It can also be confusing because what exactly is an update? Well, an update could be updating the record back to the database, or it could be using one of their AI features. And in this case, if you're using audio to text, it's going to consume 3 updates. So that really muddies the waters of what exactly is an update and how much are you going to spend based on your needs. Softr has a much more straightforward pricing plan where it's essentially based on the features that you want, which determine the tier that you're on of the plan, as well as the number of users who are going to interact with that application. Another thing that sets Softr apart is regardless of what plan you're on, how many applications you can build. Look, even if you're on the free plan, you can build unlimited applications. That doesn't change no matter what plan you're on. For Glide, you can see if you're on the free plan or the maker plan, you only get one published app. It's not until you get up to team and business that you get unlimited applications. Now, most of the time when it comes to pricing, you're used to a linear pricing model. You start off with free if you've got some sort of freemium option, and then it's a little bit more expensive, and then it costs more, and you go up from there, and maybe you get to some sort of enterprise plan. That's how it works for Softr. We've got free, we've got basic, professional, business, and enterprise, and you typically upgrade via that path, which is what most people are used to. For Glide, this is not really how this works. Yes, we have a free plan at the bottom. Yes, we have business or even custom above that, but Maker is very different from team and business, and here's the reason why. So Glide started off as being both an application builder for building your consumer-driven MVPs as well as internal tools. But they're really repositioning themselves to be intentionally for building internal tools within your organization. Now, they don't want to totally rule out this other user base of people that they have that are building an MVP app and they're trying to scale it and things like that. However, it's really not who they're targeting. And so there's this maker plan, and it's very different because you can have this one published app and you can only have it for personal users. Now, the personal users are going to be people who sign into your Glide app using a consumer email domain, such as Gmail, or an education one, such as a .edu. So really they're saying, hey, if you're building an app for your soccer club at school, great, you're good to go. You use this maker plan. Or you want to build something for your community, awesome. But they have to log in with a Gmail or a Yahoo or something like that email address or their education domain. If people start suddenly logging in with a business domain, you can't do that, right? You only get access to those personal emails. And so this maker plan ends up having a lot of limitations around it where you can't just suddenly add on, oh, I'm going to have more users. Now, it looks pretty good if we come down to the maker plan down here, users unlimited. You don't have to worry about those number of users. However, you're still paying for those updates that you have and you're playing within the confines of the features that are available to you. And so, because Glide is really focused on that set of internal organizations building applications, they're not really building features geared towards building those one-off apps. Now, I say this not as a criticism of Glide, because this is really the exact same approach that Softr is taking from its positioning. It once was really a tool that, hey, build whatever website that you want, build a web application, and they're now really going after the internal tools market as well. They're just handling it a little bit differently, so it really doesn't matter the domain of the email address of that user in terms of distinguishing it from general business email addresses and then personal accounts that you might have. Now, that being said, Softr still does have a difference between internal and external users of an application. So they're still going after this same limited number of users at a company where it goes up to 100 here. These are going to be people who share your specific email domain. So in my case, we're automationhelpers.com. If Ben, my colleague, logs in, he counts as one of these internal users. So in reality, this is very similar to how Glide works as well. But then we have the external users for Softr. The difference here is that you can mix and match these users, right? So if I'm on a professional plan, I can still have 5,000 of these external users. These are people who are on their free email domain or outside of your organization. And you can have those 50 users who are inside of the Automation Helpers organization. So those can be in tandem together as opposed to being two separate plans. And that's the big difference right here, is that if you're on that maker plan, you can't combine it with those business users. Now, another big thing to point out here is look at the top level pricing itself. If you're just doing a quick glance, it looks really similar for pricing. Hey, we have business, $249 a month. Hey, we have business, $269 a month. Okay, that means Glide's a little cheaper than Softr. Well, that's not really how it works because we're being priced on those number of users. So in this case, that $249 plan is going to come with 20 internal users. If we go over to Softr and take a look at the business plan, this is going to come with 100 internal users. So now back over on Glide, let's try to make this even. Let's say we want those 100 users we would get on Softr. And so if I drag this up, and this goes custom, but let's say I get to 95, that's going to cost you $849 a month. And then in reality, if you have that many users, it's probably going to take more updates. So that's going to up the price as well. So Softr ends up being much more affordable than Glide if we're just looking at a straight up comparison of the pricing, not taking into consideration the actual features and the building experience of the platforms themselves. Now, one area where Glide has a huge pricing advantage is when it comes to handling of progressive web apps. So for Softr, this becomes a big upgrade feature. You need to be on the business plan at $269 a month in order to get that PWA, which means you can download that application to your phone, take advantage of some of the functionality that you'd have on a mobile device. For Glide, on the other hand, their entire experience just is a PWA. You're on the free plan and you get access to that. So this is a big differentiator, especially if mobile is really important to you. Now, another thing you'll want to think about is how many people on your team are actually involved in building these internal applications. So in Softr, we call these people workspace collaborators. You can see even on the free plan, you're entitled to 5 workspace collaborators. This goes up to 10 on the professional, and you have 15 on business. When it comes to Glide, if we're on the free plan, we only get 2 editors. That stays the same for Maker, and then we go up to 5 and up to 10 on the team and business. So think about how you're building this out. Do you have an IT team? Is it business users who are building this? Are you working with outside consultants? Because all of this is going to impact the pricing based on the number of people who need to collaborate on this. One of the huge differentiators between Softr and Glide is whether you need additional software in order for your applications to function. In Softr's case, Softr is really just a front-end tool. They're building the front end of the internal application that people interact with, but the data itself is being written to a different backend. With Softr, we call these data sources. Currently today, we have 4 different data sources available: Airtable, Google Sheets, HubSpot, and SmartSuite. So you can see Softr is really pairing with these other business applications, which is great because they get the ecosystem or network effects of working with these tools. If you want to build an internal application for your team on top of SmartSuite, on top of Airtable, on top of HubSpot, you can easily do that with Softr. With Glide, we have different databases we can connect to as well. Whereas Softr really got its start with Airtable, Glide was primarily tied to Google Sheets. But now you can tie it to Google Sheets, Airtable. In addition to those, they offer Excel. Another great feature that they have is lots of different SQL sources. So you might have your own Postgres database, maybe you're using BigQuery, or you have your own SQL server, and you can connect to those data sources as well. Why is this important? Well, as Glide is targeting those internal teams of building applications, most companies aren't starting from scratch. They don't just have no data and they're like, oh yeah, we're going to spin up a Google Sheet to be able to do this. Instead, they already have databases of customer information, and it's probably stored in some sort of SQL database. So Glide is really far ahead when it comes to how easy they make it to connect to some of these additional data sources, especially if you're a larger company. But But Glide's also covering the other side of the spectrum because they have their own Glide tables. This right here is a database of Glide tables that are directly within Glide. You don't have to connect to an outside data source like Airtable or Google Sheets. You make all of your updates directly within Glide, which means to effectively compare pricing, it's really two different things. With Softr, you're always pairing it with an outside data source. With Glide, you could very well just use their Glide tables and not have to pay for any additional subscription. But what makes this even more interesting is that Glide is incentivizing its own user base to use Glide tables because Glide tables does not consume updates. So remember when we were talking about our pricing down here of users and updates, and we'd say, okay, well, how many updates do we have? That's going to change. Well, if you're using Glide tables and you're using it internally within the application, you're doing updates, you're creating records, all of that, it's not going to cost you for those updates. So they're making a big push that people use Glide tables internally. And it's a pretty genius move because if you're an enterprise customer at the top end of the spectrum, you don't care about spending a few $100 extra to be able to connect to your SQL databases. But if you're at the lower end of the spectrum and you're really concerned about those updates, just use Glide tables. And that means that Glide ends up being stickier. It's harder to get away from Glide because if you're doing everything, your database, your front end, if it's all within Glide, it's going to be hard to leave them as a customer. So this really comes down to your philosophy of how you want to manage your data. So in Softr, they're making direct API calls to whatever you're using as a backend to then render those results on the page, on the front end. So what you're seeing here is connected to Google Sheets, and then this information is being pulled. They're making that API call and it's being pulled so that you can see it. And of course, you can add new records and update records, and that's making those changes directly to Google Sheets. But this is a very different approach to Glide. So I'm inside of Glide and I've got some Glide tables up at the top, but then I've also synced to Google Sheets. And this Google Sheets data, I'm actually seeing and making changes on the back end here where I have my own data editor. So I don't have to be going back and forth between the Google Sheet. I can actually be here and then it's syncing this. It's keeping it in sync with that Google Sheet. So this is not how the data is presented to the user. That's over here in our layout. This is what they're actually interacting with. But as I'm actually building out the application, I can see and manage and make updates to the data directly from within Glide, where there's no real way to be able to do that in Softr. But again, this comes down to trust. Do you want to have another party have access to all of your data doing big syncs, or do you want to make a call at the point of actually interacting with the data to render that on the screen? There's a lot of different philosophies when it comes to these approaches. One more thing in terms of your technology stack. We talked about how in Softr, you're always pairing it with another data source, something like Airtable. And you're probably also pairing that with an iPaaS solution like Make or Zapier. In Glide, it's kind of up to you if you need to use Make or Zapier. There's a number of integrations that we can run out of the box on the server side. And there's a call API, which means we can actually make external HTTP requests to be able to pull data into our application. Next, let's talk about our building experience with blocks and components inside of each of these applications. So to make it similar enough, we're going to use a contact detail from each of these applications. Here's Softr, and we've got one over in Glide, and we're just going to talk about how these components and blocks all work together. In Softr, blocks are talked about at a higher level. It's more akin to views that we have inside of something like Airtable. If we take a look, we can see that a lot of them are available for free to be able to use. And then if you scroll down, there's a number that get restricted by the plan that you're on. So if you want to have something like a calendar, well, that's only on the professional. Or if you want a Kanban, that's on professional. It does feature some unique blocks over Glide. One of those is an org chart that you can actually interact with on the page. There's an inbox as well. And a timeline is on the horizon as well. In Glide, we really only have a couple of components like our web embed and scanners that are restricted to higher level plans. But this is what I think makes a huge difference in building experience if you're building inside of Softr or if you're building inside of Glide. Now I mentioned that inside of Softr, blocks are really at a higher level. So let's expand a list, for example, and you can see that we have different kinds of lists, and therefore these are different blocks. So really different blocks inside of Softr are encompassing different stylistic decisions. It's still a list, but you have one block that has a more vertical mode. You have some that have small cards. All of this is handled within the block itself. So that means this area that we have on the screen here is actually just one block. This image and the title with her name and the field data is one block. This is a list details page with 3-column view. And then inside of our content, if we go into an individual field, now we also have different field types. We have headings, and we can format things as emails and URLs. We've got audio and video files. We have images and embeds, Google Maps, ratings. Now let me show you how this is different from Glide. So in Glide, we also have a number of different, they're called components instead of blocks here. And we can see that we have more options to choose from, but it's because it encompasses both the field types as well as the blocks. So it's kind of a different way of thinking about it. You'll notice that these components are done at a smaller level here. So take a look. We can hover over any of these components that we have. We have a container. This container is grouping a name together. And that name has its own design preferences and style. So we can say this is a cover or profile or image or simple. So it still has design elements that we can tweak. But notice how that would be different from inside of Softr, where these would each probably be different blocks that we have. Whereas inside of Glide, these are different styling options within a single title block. Or in this case, we have what we just call a collection. This would be like a list. So in Softr, you saw how we had lots of different lists to work with. Here, we just have a collection, and then we can choose what's this going to look like? How's it going to appear? Is this list going to appear as a Kanban? Is it going to appear as a list? Is it going to show as a card? I always find it really interesting to hear about people's reactions to the learning curve of each of these applications. In Softr, because we have these blocks at a high level, I think this is typically easier for a non-technical user to get started because they can simply add these high-level blocks and then just tailor those blocks. Glide takes a little bit more initial setup, but then you also have additional configuration that can happen because you're doing it at a smaller level, a micro level, compared to the macro level of the blocks. I also find the design philosophies of these two companies really fascinating because in Softr, they say, hey, you've got a block and you can click on styles. And here's where you can get down to essentially what's the CSS. We can change our paddings and margins of this. We can change our background color, how this appears with our border. We can expand that. You get to make all of these fine granular decisions. And Glide might give you fewer design configuration settings. So they're taking a little bit of the control away, but they're really focused on making this beautiful aesthetic experience, and they're constantly updating the look and the feel of the application so it's always up to date. Now, both of these tools ultimately let you change the CSS, so you can really do what you want. But I think it just comes down to what level of control do you want on a day-to-day basis? Do you want to change the padding and the widths and things like that? Or do you just want it to kind of work the way it is? And really, that just comes down to a design preference of your own. While both of these applications let you capture signatures, I would say that Glide has the huge upper hand when it comes to components that work really well for mobile. They've got a scanner where you can capture QR codes or barcodes. You can record audio directly on your phone, and you can capture the location of your device. So while both of these applications can look nice at different resolutions, Glide is really providing that extra layer of functionality if mobile is a big focus of what you're doing. Actions are really important when it comes to building internal tools because you don't want your users simply just to consume information, you want them to actually interact with your application. In Softr, we have a couple different areas where we could add actions. So I have a list here, and I could add a button that's going to be at the top of my list. I could also add it to each of the individual items. So we could add one right here. Now, when it comes to the different types of actions that we have available to us, you can see that we have lots of navigational things. We can open a details page. We can open up a specific URL, which oftentimes we're concatenating things in Airtable and then opening up those specific URLs. We can edit a record. We could do a one-click update. Maybe we want to put in today's date, or we want to update a status, and we can do that with a single click of a button, or we can delete a record. And on our top bar buttons, we can also add records. We can also configure who can complete these actions, and we can do this through the use of visibility rules. So we can say who can actually see this button, all logged in users, or we could get even more specific and say a subset or a user group of these users has access to that action button. Now, Glide has the ability to connect buttons to different actions as well. And so we have our standard actions out of the box, things like our CRUD operations. We want to be able to create new records. We want to edit records. We want to delete records. But a huge advantage of Glide is the ability to create really sophisticated actions. So let's enable these. And if I go to add an action, take a look at all of these different options that we have. So a number of the ones we looked at in Softr are navigation based. You can see all these different options we have. We can show specific screens that we want to navigate to. We could sign in. We could show a user profile. We could go to a certain tab. These are all navigation oriented. We could open up an address on a map. Again, that kind of ties back to some of those mobile capabilities. We could also do a lot of things with our data. So we could add rows to our database. That's just going to be essentially creating a record like we saw before. We could set certain values. That's going to be similar to that one-click update that we have inside of Softr. But we can get pretty sophisticated here. We could generate a CSV file. We could query JSON. We could add elements to a set. So we're doing a lot of more complicated things behind the scenes. We've got different interactions like showing notifications, playing sounds, adding wait conditions. Here's where we've got that scanning barcode that we talked about. Communication, again, this is all tied into mobile. So if you click a button to say send SMS, it's going to open up your default text messaging that you have on your phone. And then in addition, there's several AI features and integrations as well that we can tap into because again, with their actions, you might not need to use a Make or a Zapier. You can do it all within Glide. Now, I should mention that Softr also has generative AI capabilities for things like creating images and text. But with our action builder, we can get even more advanced. So we can have multi-step actions that we create. So instead of just pressing a button and it opens up our dialer, maybe we want to log that phone call. So when they click that button, we're going to dial that phone number and it's going to add that row. Or you press a button and it makes an external API call. And then have it automatically generate a document from the press of a button. Now, if you choose to pair Softr with a tool like Airtable, you've got a lot of advanced functionalities. So you could generate a quote and you could send Slack notifications and you could do more advanced kinds of logic. Now let's talk about permissions. Softr makes it really easy to be able to add different user groups. And then we can control visibility to certain pages or blocks by clicking on a visibility tab and saying who has access to this by their user group. There's also a new feature to add global data restrictions. So this supersedes anything that happens at the block level. We can say for the admins, they can only view certain types of records that meet these certain conditions, and we can create different conditions around what we want people to be able to do. In Glide, we can also create different roles for our users. And that can be used to add conditions of who can do what. You could say this is restricted to a certain role. And there's also a construct called row owner, which is to say, if the user has a certain email address, we only want these companies to be accessible by the person who matches on that email. So for both of these companies, we can toggle between different users that we have and see what data they have access to. And that works the same way in Softr. We can toggle between these different users. When it comes to authentication, both of these applications offer pretty similar functionality. Both have the ability to send PIN codes via email or text. There are magic links that you can click within the context of an email to automatically authenticate you. They offer Google sign-in, and at higher plans, there's also single sign-on. The main distinction is that Softr also offers email and password basic authentication. When it comes to support, both Softr and Glide have very robust and active communities. Softr definitely has the upper hand when it comes to support, because while you can create a ticket in Glide, you'll actually get live chat access inside of Softr. One last point in this area is that Softr is going to be better when it comes to any external applications. Even though they're geared for internal tools, they have certain features like SEO functionality that allow your site to actually be indexed. So in the use case where you have public visitors who then become users of the application, that's going to be a much better fit for Softr. For Glide, it's still feasible that you have an external facing application, but you're not going to get some of those additional SEO advantages. So now it comes down to the question, which of these applications is a better fit for your organization and your next project? First off, I want to remind you that both of these tools are going after the same market of internal tools. So if you're looking to build your first consumer app, I would look for other applications like Flutterflow and WeWeb, which are better suited for that. So where might Softr be a better fit for you? Well, first off, it's more affordable. If you have more users, it's going to cost you significantly more on Glide. Softr also has a more distributed stack. So if you're already using tools today like Airtable and Zapier, you might find yourself right at home using Softr alongside these tools. Softr continues to be an ecosystem player with different business applications. So if you're using Airtable or SmartSuite or HubSpot, Softr plays really nicely with those other tools. Softr is also really easy to get up and running, especially if you come from a non-technical background. Glide, on the other hand, has a better mobile experience and more aesthetic design right out of the box. With Glide, you can have a more consolidated stack using fewer tools. And Glide's more focused on SQL data sources if you already have internal databases at your company. And finally, Glide's going to be a great choice if you want stronger native advanced actions within the platform. I hope this has been helpful to see this evaluation of Softr and Glide and which one might be the right fit for you. If you have any questions or need help building your applications, don't hesitate to reach out to our website at automationhelpers.com, where we're offering free 30-minute consultations.